This is Andy Gutierrez from Wars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is Ashley Eckstein, Ahsoka Tano from Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi show number 404. This is your spoiler-free place for Star Wars discussion, analysis, and rhetoric. I'm your host, Dan Z, drinking One Nation coffee out of my black and white Lucasfilm coffee mug, ready to talk some Star Wars with each and every one of you. On today's show, Sarah Kuhn joins us to talk about the novel Star Wars Doctor Aphra. This is the actual text from the exclusive audiobook of the story of Dr. Aphra. It's an expansion of Kieran Gillen's groundbreaking Darth Vader comic book series and Dr. Aphra series, but with Sarah's expansion of the story through novel form. Again, this is the text representation of the audiobook, and it's very, very cool. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some coffee with Kenobi.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first?
Joining us today for a cup of coffee is the author of Star Wars Doctor Aphra, Sarah Kuhn. Sarah, welcome to Coffee with Kenobi.
Thank you so much.
It is a pleasure to speak with you. You, of course, are the author of the book that came out. It comes out on hardcover on April 6th. It is Star Wars Doctor Aphra. And the description as sent to us, but of course many people are very familiar with this, is Dr. Aphra teams up with Darth Vader himself in the original script to the audiobook production, which was released in July 2020, an expanded adaptation of the critically acclaimed Marvel comic series. Well, Sarah, there are so many things to talk about with this wonderful book and this amazing character, but I'm always excited to find out when an author finds out about a brand new project, kind of the thoughts that go through your mind and how familiar you were with Dr. Aphra before this entire process.
Sure. I was a huge fan of the character. I just love her so much. I feel like, I've said this before, but I feel like of all the characters in Star Wars, she's clearly having the most fun out of anyone. Just, I think that, sometimes when you're a main character in a Star Wars film, you possibly are not having a great time. That's just part of your journey. But I really love that she is always having a great time and just kind of living her best life and really getting the most out of the galaxy. So I have always loved her. And, I do remember when I got that call because, I've been a Star Wars fan pretty much since birth. I think that's true for a lot of us. And, I've written a lot of licensed work. And of course, this was something I was always interested, getting to write Star Wars. So I remember that I got that call when I was in Target. And it was my agent, and she just said, we have an offer for you, and it's Star Wars. And I don't think I even heard the next part. But of course, if, I could have picked a project for myself, I think this certainly would have been it. This character, I felt like was such a great fit for me. And I was just so excited to be part of telling her story.
Marvelous. And yeah, I know what you mean. When you hear the word Star Wars, the next part doesn't even matter. You're like, yeah, of course I'm going to do it. It doesn't matter what it says. It's about Dianoga. Yeah. Great.
I try to play it cool, but sometimes I do not succeed.
Well, I can tell you, just talking to you now for a few minutes, the energy that you have is so great and invigorating. And it's a perfect metaphor kind of for Aphra and what she's like. But before we get to your amazing book, let's talk about Kieran Gillen creating this character. I had the good fortune to interview him for StarWars.com years ago when the Darth Vader series came out, followed by, of course, the Dr. Aphra comic book series. But what is it about this character to you that you think is so compelling? Because she's very original and fresh, much more so than many other characters in popular fiction.
Yeah, she's amazing. I was a huge fan of that run. I love what Kieran Gillen and Salvador Larroca did with her, just like creating her and then putting her on the page in a way where she was so just immediately magnetic. Like there was something about her that the energy is just so visceral. I feel like, as soon as you see her on that page, you really can't take your eyes off of her. She's just so compelling. And I think that a lot of it for me was, she is chaos. She's chaos personified. You don't really know what she's going to do next. I think sometimes she doesn't know what she's going to do next. And as a writer, that's extremely appealing. I'm an Asian American woman, and seeing a woman who I felt like really, looked like me. I don't know if we have the exact same personality. I don't tend to be quite as thrill seeking as Aphra, although I do consider some of the things she does to certainly be very aspirational. But that was also a big deal, because I think a lot of times for me, when I see characters who I maybe feel that connection to as an Asian American woman, popping up on the page of like big franchises and such, a lot of times they are maybe not the characters who are centered. They are not the characters who are getting to really have the kind of fun that Aphra does. And I really love that she lives her life so unapologetically, that she is who she is. She feels no need to justify anything or apologize for anything. She just kind of is. And I love that. I love that she is in many ways so joyful, even though maybe sometimes she's, perhaps joyful about the wrong things. I just really love that. I really love that energy. And so I felt such a connection to her. I thought her design was so cool. The sort of costume they gave her with the hat and everything. So yeah, there was just a lot about her that I loved immediately. And of course, the way that Kieran wrote her, she's such a great foil for Darth Vader. I mean, I think, for me, that those comics almost became more like the Aphra show, just because I was so into her. But obviously when you have a character like Darth Vader, he is, as I think she says at one point, really a man of few words. So he kind of needs someone to bounce off of him the way that she does and sort of comment on everything. And yeah, I guess like what I'm saying is I really loved everything about her. And I love the way they just kind of introduced her and you were just immediately in. At least I was.
I was too. There's just something very interesting about, first of all, if you have someone who can go toe to toe with Darth Vader, you've got something pretty special and extremely unique in the Star Wars universe. But much more beyond that, I think a compelling thing about her is that she's got this incredibly reckless side. I mean, like you said so perfectly, even she doesn't know what she's going to do next, and she will be the first person to admit that. But underneath it all, there's this really, really poignant pain that she has. And I feel like, of course, Kieran's run is legendary, but I feel like what you did in this really took it to another level for me. I mean, listening to it on audio, of course, is a very cool, unique way to do it. But you captured her voice, and I feel like you made her even more nuanced than she already was. Talk about walking that fine line, because it's something that Aphra is struggling with for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, these kinds of characters a lot of times are the most interesting to me. The characters who have such bravado and such panache, and, she's so charismatic. And as we've said, so chaotic, but obviously there is kind of I don't know if, I guess the right word is, pain or vulnerability or something underneath that's kind of driving all of that. And, I have really loved reading the exploration of that we got from Kieran's run. And then, obviously some of the other writers who have worked on her, Simon Spurrier and Alyssa Wong. And I always felt like that was something that was really interesting. And since I was writing this as a script, but from Aphra's POV, I felt like we could perhaps get into that a little bit more. I've written comics, I've written prose, and in comics, I generally am not allowed to write a 300-page internal monologue. But for this, I was. So I thought, one of the first choices we made, and I remember this was kind of the first phone call I had with Elizabeth Schaefer, who's my wonderful editor at Del Rey, and Nick Martorelli, who's the amazing producer of the audio drama. And we had sort of had this conversation of like, what is the sort of framework for this version of this story? We're telling it in audio. We want to take advantage of that. We have this amazing character. And I always thought very strongly that it should be in her voice, because the comic that we were adapting, the series we were adapting is still called Darth Vader. It is not yet called Dr. Aphra. And I wanted to kind of hear this story in her voice. And I felt like she would want to tell this in her voice too. So we did decide, this is from her POV. She is telling this story. She's very unreliable, so we can have some fun with that. But as a writer, when I'm thinking about, okay, we're telling this really focused story on this character, what are sort of the things that drive her? What is underneath all that swagger? What are some other things that are going on? And I always thought it was really interesting that she is so reckless. She does dive headfirst into these really dangerous situations. She gets called foolish all the time for the way she kind of runs headfirst toward danger. But I also felt like she had this really baked in survival instinct. Like she always comes out of it. She always manages to live. She always manages to get out of these situations that really she has no business getting out of. And I thought those two things were very much, built into her, and that they were kind of at odds. It was kind of this conflict of someone who wants to do all these like wild, dangerous things, but also is definitely a survivor. And I think that's where we kind of found that poignance, that like, what is this coming from? Why are these the two things that sort of exist within her that are at such odds? And so the story I kind of wanted to explore was, where does that come from? But also, how does it kind of play out in the context of this story? The key line for me that was such a brilliant Kieran Gillen line was it was something like, the way that I've lived, I know I should be dead. Like, I know that, that me surviving is very much against the odds, considering all the things that I've done. And so I thought that was sort of the key to unlocking that. Like, okay, like at what point, did she sort of realize like, yes, I should be dead, but actually I don't want to be dead. And so that was kind of what we were trying to explore there.
It's very powerful too, at least for me, as the book progresses. I don't know that she's necessarily in that place. You could almost argue that she has almost a death wish, at least to me personally, at first. And then she kind of becomes to realization, like you just said, hey, I actually don't want to die. I definitely don't want Darth Vader to kill me. Yes. I know I have something to live for. I'm still very much exploring what that is. But it does take her a while to get to that point. And I feel like it's still kind of constantly evolving too, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, she's also telling this story from kind of a point in the future where, she has a little more, perhaps a little more insight into herself. I won't say that she's going to actually use it or do anything valuable with it. But, she has a little more insight into herself. And so she's kind of telling this story about when she didn't have that. And I always felt like there were these sort of moments where she had these realizations, So one moment is when Darth Vader actually tries to kill her and is like, okay, this is the end of the line for you. And, she's said before, I'm cool with that. Like, make it fast, use the lightsaber. And I felt like in that moment, like reading that scene in the comics, I was like, I think this is one of the moments where she actually realized, I actually don't want that. Like I have all this big talk about, like do it, like use the lightsaber. But when push comes to shove, when I'm actually in this situation where Darth Vader is like strangling me, maybe I don't want that. Maybe I do actually want to live. And then, of course, the other moment was when she's in the when she's in Sunspot prison, and she sees Sana Starros again, and she kind of realizes, if I were to die right now, I would actually have some regrets. And one of those regrets is how I treated this person, how I dealt with this relationship, how, I said I was doing it for the good of both of us, but it was actually quite selfish, like me kind of leaving her like I did and acting like I didn't care. And I actually do care very much. And, I sort of knew that she would only admit that when she was in the worst possible situation. And, as you can see, once she gets out of it, she's kind of eager to be like, oh, I was just sad. I didn't really mean that. Like, that's obviously not the real me. But I loved the idea that sort of at these really low moments, you could kind of strip away a lot of that bravado and say, no, she does. She would never admit this, but she does have actual feelings. She does have people she cares about. She is, very, I guess, human after all. And that, of course, is always something that's, very interesting to explore as a writer. What is this person like when you strip away everything else?
So you brought up Sana Starros, and to me, I would love to see you tackle an entire book just about Sana. I think she's really compelling. She brings out a very unique, a very vulnerable, a very human side of CWK Aphra that I think is important to her development as a character, because she's so much more than the bravado she first presents to the reader or the audience that she's with. But talk about how Sana is so essential to Aphra's story.
Well, that was really, that relationship was really the thing that I pulled out, that I kind of wanted to make the backbone of this. I am a romance writer. I write a lot in that space in various categories. And I really, and I've always been a shipper. I mean, my first kind of obsession with Star Wars was Han and Leia. I feel like that's really what I imprinted on, and, rewound those parts of the videotape quite a lot. So I think I'm always drawn to, what's the romance, what's the ship, what am I really obsessing over? And I always loved that pairing. And I felt like, a lot of what we had seen of them in the comics was obviously like very like charged, like them arguing, like it's kind of the point where, they've had the relationship and now they hate each other. And a lot of their relationship that we had seen in the comics up to that point was them hating each other. And I was kind of like, that hate feels so passionate. Like it feels, again, so charged. I feel like they obviously still have feelings for each other. Like it's sort of turned into something toxic. But clearly at one point there was something very passionate there. So I actually wanted to show them, in those stages where they were in love, where they were, perhaps a bit mushy, which is funny because neither character is really what you would describe as mushy. But, I always loved that relationship. And I love Sana as well. I think, she is also such a fascinating character and just so cool. And you can really see why, Aphra would be really into her immediately. So that was just a relationship I really wanted to explore, because I felt like whenever we saw her kind of pop up in the comics and face off against Aphra, they were always having these really like intense sort of back and forth. There was clearly chemistry on the page, and I loved how they sort of interacted with each other and balanced each other. And I wanted to see that relationship when it was actually good. And so in my original pitch, like, what I had sort of come up with was once I had sort of keyed into that line about, I should be dead. I was like, okay, what is sort of the driver of this? Like, if we're going deep into Aphra's POV, what is the thing she's sort of remembering? And I wanted her to remember that relationship. And I wanted to sort of build that as the backbone of the audio version, just seeing how that progressed so that when we get to the point where they're meeting up, in the, I guess, sort of present, but not exactly present since Aphra is still narrating to us from some future point, that I was just like, there's something there. And I want to explore how we get to this point. And then I feel like once we get to this point, it's kind of the heart of this story. The fact that that this is the one person that can get Aphra to admit, like, I do, even though she won't maybe admit it to her face, but, I do have feelings. I did care about you. I did love you. And so, yeah, that was just a pairing that I've always been a fan of. And I love both of those characters. And I really wanted to explore how they would interact on the page before the love kind of turned into something else.
Yeah, there's a lot of great key things to pull from that. Certainly, it's toxic, but it doesn't start that way.
No.
And if you don't have those beautiful flashbacks in sort of their meet cute and how that evolves over time, then you've got an even more. It's very Shakespearean in a way where you invest all this emotion in the characters and then you tear them down.
Yeah.
And then they realize at the end, oh, I really should have did things a little bit differently. And that plays out over and over again. So how much of that was inspired from the comics and how much of that was just something that you thought just seemed like a logical progression of their story together?
Well, I think, obviously this was adapted from that story in the comics. So there are a lot of scenes you will find that were in the comics, just, perhaps dramatized a little differently and dramatized from Aphra's point of view, which is very different than Darth Vader's point of view. I feel like as far as the Sana Aphra story, as far as like the flashbacks and everything, that is something that I really consciously tried to build. I wanted to show them back in university together. I wanted to show the moment they met. I wanted to show the moment when they kind of got together and what that very unusual courting process was like. And then I did have to say, of course, because for my romance reader fans, this is a romantic story, but it does not have a happily ever after because it's Aphra. And that doesn't tend to happen for her, at least in a romantic sense. But yeah, I am very proud of that story. I feel like that was, kind of one of my main contributions to the Aphra canon was building that out a little bit and showing like, okay, like, remember when they were kind of lovey-dovey? I mean, for them. Remember, like, now we know the first moment that Aphra kind of noticed Sana. And that was I think that was one of the first moments I listened to when they recorded the audio. And it's still one of my favorites because, Emily Wuzeller, who voiced Aphra for the audio version, and just she is so amazing. She did so much work. Like, I felt so bad because she had to say so many words. But when we had that moment where where Aphra first sees Sana, in the classroom, I listened to that, and my husband was listening with me, and he was like, "Oh, I think Emily's voice just like dropped an octave. Like, she's so like affected by seeing this person. She has such an instant crush." And I love that because it's sort of like, okay, who or what would unsettle Aphra? And it's the fact that she sees this person and she has such a visceral reaction.
So I'm really glad you talked about that aspect of it, because in the comics, when I would see them together, I would just find myself very frustrated because I thought, okay, Aphra, you're not helping yourself. You're making things continually worse. You're the ultimate self-saboteur. But what your book did is I feel like it gave me a reason to care beyond the superficial stuff, because you see the relationship, you see the history, you see that they were both very normal people for a set amount of time in the galaxy, which explains then why there's so much anger and so much mistrust, especially from Santa's point of view, which really fleshes it out well. But I'll tell you what, speaking of fleshing out well, let's take a quick break. When we return, we'll talk about the performance of Dr. Aphra by Emily on the audiobook itself. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
MEI and Mouse Fan Travel is your one-stop shop for your vacation needs and your plans to Walt Disney World, Disneyland, or the cruise lines. Travel looks much different now than it did a couple of months ago, and with the opening of Walt Disney World and soon, hopefully, the opening of Disneyland, you need a place to go where you can trust, and they will help you figure out and navigate all the different circumstances and guidelines that Disney has put out for you. And I can say that we had our vacation modified, and as soon as dates were announced, MEI contacted me directly to help me reschedule, which is exactly what I was hoping to do. So if you are interested in rescheduling your vacation or want to try to plan a Walt Disney World, Disneyland vacation, or anywhere else you want to go on the planet, be sure to contact MEI and Mouse Fan Travel at www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel. Their signature service and expert advice will help you maximize your vacation time and dollar, and they will help you figure out all the different changes and modifications going on at the Disney theme parks. They are amazing, and I can tell you, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, the peace of mind that Becky Menken and the crew at MEI and Mouse Fan Travel have given me is invaluable. If you're interested at all, again, go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel. You brought up the performance, and the actor who performs Aphra is just absolutely exquisite and brings your prose to life in a very unique way because you get to hear it. You know, with all the sound effects and the great stuff that Penguin Random House Audio does anyway. And you mentioned earlier hearing that first scene, but what was it like for you to actually hear your words performed like that? I mean, it had to be very special.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was amazing. And, I love Emily. I'm such a fan of hers. And she actually has now recorded, almost all of my books in audio. She's like, I don't know, the voice of my work or something. But,
so cool.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because, just like within the same time period that this was happening, we had just, sold the rights for the audiobooks for Heroine Complex, which is my kind of fantasy romance series about Asian American superheroines. And they were like, okay, so we need to get someone to record all of these. They're kind of going to do them back to back. Here's some samples from different narrators. And if you could pick a few, just in case, your first choice, like it doesn't work out because of schedule or something, like just give us a couple options. And I was like, oh, of course, I'm very professional. I would obviously do that. And then I listened to all the samples and I was like, I'm sorry. I have to say that I think the only person that can do this is Emily Muzeller. So can you please try to get her? Because I just feel like her voice is the perfect match for my writing voice. And I would like to hear it. And they were like, okay, we understand. And so they got her to do it. And then I think it was just a couple days later that I got the email from Nick, the producer, saying, here's the cast for the Aphra audiobook. And I saw her name and I just thought that was so cool that she was also Aphra. So yeah, like when they started sending me clips and stuff, it was just so emotional because, she's a fellow biracial Asian American woman. And I don't know. I don't even know how to explain it. It was just cool to hear her saying those words. And I felt like she just got that character. Like a lot of people were like, what is Aphra going to sound like? Like, is it going to sound like she sounds when I read the comic books? Is it going to sound like the voice I've sort of made up in my head? And, it's a little nerve wracking because there were a lot of expectations about this very popular character whose actual voice we hadn't really heard. And so when I heard it, I was like, well, I think this is amazing. I think it's perfect. I think she really captured both the bravado and the vulnerability underneath. And I think that's very difficult to do, especially when you're given this script where you're like, okay, this script is basically 80% you talking. It is, there is like 300 pages of internal monologue, which I'm happy now people can actually physically see that since there's a print edition. They can see like the amount of words that she had to say, that she had to act. And so hearing that for the first time, I was like, wow, she really, like, I can't imagine anyone else doing this. Like when I hear Aphra now in my head, whether it's from the comics or, reading over this script to get it into the print edition, I just hear Emily. And I think that's really powerful, that she, to me, became so just immediately linked to this character in that way. So I feel very lucky. And hearing her say those words that I wrote for this character for the first time was really cool and really emotional.
Oh, I'm sure I would have cried. I mean, Emily is brilliant, and and legitimately I'm such a huge fan of Aphra. I love this character so much. What I wouldn't give to see her have her own Disney Plus TV series. I mean, that would be the best. That would be the best. But I agree with you. Emily brings, with the character in your words and Emily's recreation of that through her performance, it is how I honestly, when I was listening to it, I remember thinking, well, of course that's how Aphra sounds. I mean, that's Aphra. That's it. So like when I'm reading her comics now, I hear Emily's voice, and it's very, very cool. So did the two of you get to collaborate or work together at all? I mean, I know they're kind of separate wheelhouses.
Yeah.
Did you get to chat?
I mean, I don't think for this book, like for my original books, like those were actually, I think, recorded after this. So then we did have a relationship, and she was able to reach out to me and be like, oh, how do you say this name? Like, how did you imagine this person? For this, it was very separate because, that's generally my experience with licensed work. You write something, you give it to people, and then you eventually receive like a finished product or, different steps or whatever. You're like, oh, I did that. Amazing. Okay. And so with this, I had no idea like what the casting was going to be. I didn't know even how they were doing that really. I trusted Nick because, he did such an amazing job with the Dooku audio drama, and he has like so much experience with this. He's just so brilliant. Like he really created all these soundscapes. And also I think that process was a little bit weird because of COVID. They originally, I think, wanted to record this like they normally would with all the actors in a studio together so they could really like interact and play off of each other and get that great chemistry and all of that. And then, of course, in the end, they were all recording in their homes, like separate from each other. And I guess Nick actually would read, like he would be the reader with them. Like if, he was reading with Emily and there was another character, he would read that character and then record her lines. And so we were joking that we were like, oh, release the Martorelli cut. Like we need to hear the cut where Nick is doing all the voices, or all the non-Aphra voices. Like that would be so cool. But, and then I think the one thing they were able to record with actors together was they recorded some of the Aphra Sana scenes with, Emily and Nicole Lewis, who played Sana. Like, I think they got them together on Zoom. So some of those scenes, especially where they need to have this really kind of tender chemistry, they were able to record like kind of together, which I think is cool. But yeah, I didn't really talk to Emily until after we had a San Diego Comic-Con at home panel for Aphra. And that was really the first time we got to talk to each other about it. And it was really cool because, we kind of were able to ask each other questions. Like, I loved hearing about the process. And I remember asking her, and I was like, okay, I'm not asking you this because I want you to like give me compliments. I'm really curious about kind of what your favorite parts to record were, because you had to record so much. And, you obviously like really connect with this character. And it's cool. It's interesting because, I thought her response would be like, oh, it's the part where, Aphra is at her most kind of, she has the most bravado, like she's going toe to toe with Darth Vader. She's like giving this speech or like whatever it was. And she said, the parts I really loved were the parts where she was at university and she was, encountering Sana for the first time. And there was the thing with the rock climbing wall and all of that. And she was like, I just felt like, to use this word again, there was something poignant about that. There was something emotional. There was something moving. And that, I have to say, like really moved me because those are the parts that, as a writer, you're thinking like, this is a little bit quieter. This is perhaps not as flashy for, an actor. But I think because there was that emotional undercurrent, that was what I guess Emily really connected to. So it was cool to hear that. And it was cool to get to talk to her about that on that panel. And, we have since talked about other projects, we've been doing together and things like that. But yeah, I'm definitely a fan of hers for life.
I love that. That's really, really cool. Another really important and really cool thing that you've been talking about is the importance of representation for the character of Aphra and for Asian Americans. To me, that's so critically important. It means so much, both as a father and as an educator. Talk about the impact that can have.
I mean, it's just, it's one of those things that like, growing up, being who I am, I grew up in a very small town, a very small white town. And I've talked a lot about this before, but I think I never really thought I could be like a main character in anything. And sometimes that even extended to my own life. Like, I feel like there was definitely a period of time where I considered myself a supporting side character in my own life. And it was just because I never saw that, I never saw women of color being centered in things. I certainly never saw queer women of color being centered in things, especially things like this that were joyful and about, having cool adventures. And like I said, being really unapologetic and embracing who you are. And, this is like obviously one of the biggest franchises in the world. So I think I mean, I don't think I ever consciously thought about this because I just thought it was so impossible, but I don't think I ever thought I would see something like this in my lifetime, to be honest with you. When this comic came out, I felt like my mind was really blown. Like, I could not believe that this existed and that she existed. And so I just really love the fact that she's so popular and that people love her so much. And that she does mean, I think, something a little bit extra to the people who are able to see themselves in her. I know that, she certainly means a lot to me for those reasons. But it's just really cool and really refreshing to see this kind of character being centered and to also see her being so joyful. Because again, I think that's something that I certainly do not see a lot. I mean, I think obviously getting better, lots more happening. But, it still feels like a surprise. It still feels like a novelty. It still feels like something that blows my mind every time. And, I have said before that I don't it's hard to sort of articulate how important this is, but I do think that if I had seen something like this as a young person, as a kid who loves Star Wars, it would have changed my view of myself and how I kind of fit into, our galaxy, our world. And it would have kind of told me, you are important. You can be the center of the story. You are worthy of that. You are worthy of being more than a supporting character or cannon fodder or someone who's there to teach all the white people a lesson about racism. So it's hard to kind of, even state like how important that is. But I do think if I had this character when I was younger, it would have changed a lot for me.
Amen. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I obviously as a white male, I can't directly relate to that, but I can certainly understand and sympathize with that. And I think it is so important, again, as an educator and as a parent, these are the kind of things that matter. These are the kind of things that speak to people, to all people. And so I'm I'm so grateful for you and your example. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, yeah, I think we can see that like in different parts of, any franchise, but certainly Star Wars. I was certainly very emotional when I saw like all the little girls who wanted to dress up like Rey. I mean, I feel like that was such a huge moment, such a huge thing. And so, yeah, I mean, my desire is that everyone gets to see themselves as the hero of a story and is the hero of, whatever the franchise is that's opening up your imagination. I would like everyone to be able to see that.
And that is exactly how it should be. Hear, hear. So as we close out the show, two quick things I want to ask you before we let you go. I really appreciate your time. I want to talk about how, and I was actually really, I knew it would, but I was really pleasantly impressed with, I've heard the audio. I listened to the whole audio 3 different times just because I absolutely love it. I adore it. I adore the story. I adore everything about it. But it actually works really well on its own as prose. It doesn't have the traditional narrative because, as you said, most of it is monologue with Aphra apologizing quite profusely whenever she gets really emotional. But what are some of the challenges for you of writing it in this style as opposed to a traditional narrative?
Well, it was really interesting. And, I give my editor, Elizabeth Schaefer, like so many props for this because I feel like she really pushed me to take advantage of the audio format. And I haven't written anything just for audio before. I've written prose novels that have become audiobooks, but I think that's very different. I've written comic book scripts. I've written screenplays. And it sort of felt like this was almost like a combination of all of those things in a way. But I thought what was really cool was that we could push it a little bit because of the format. So, Elizabeth was the one who suggested like, okay, Aphra is like obviously such an unreliable narrator. That's one of the reasons we want to center her POV. That's one of the reasons we want to hear this in her voice. So she would say to me like, you can do things that highlight that in audio. Like she's recording this for, we know she's recording this for someone. We don't really know who it is, or if it's just, this adoring audience that she's imagining. So it was like, okay, obviously she would play to that audience. She would want to make herself look as cool as possible. And Elizabeth was like, well, what if there are some parts where, maybe she even messes with the tape or whatever, the file, like whatever it is she's recording on, like, what if she, re-records some things or tries to make herself look better or, wants to go back and erase stuff. And I just thought that was so cool and something that obviously she would do. So I love taking advantage of that. And I also love seeing it in the sort of print format, because I hope that they can kind of work as companions to each other. Like I know certainly as a Star Wars fan, I am very obsessive. I like to hear everything and read everything and know everything in every format. I remember being obsessed with all the books when I was a kid and the novelizations and the expanded universe. And I just wanted more of all of it. So I hope these can kind of be complements to each other. But it's fun to read it over again just because you can kind of see the behind the scenes of all of those things. You can see like, oh, when she rewound the tape this time and when she erased this part, maybe this was kind of the mood behind it or the intention behind it. And you get that from Emily's voice, and she is so good. But I love kind of seeing how that plays out in print. I love seeing how, I think there's one part where she's like, oh, this is getting a little too, and she can't quite say the words. And I think we put something in brackets like vulnerable or emotional. Like this is what she's avoiding. And so I love seeing that kind of in print. And I also love just seeing things like, the little like bracket stage directions we did of like, these are the different kinds of Wookiee roars. So, here, this is what he's saying. This is what this roar sounds like. My favorite, of course, was the petty Wookiee roar. I just thought that was so funny. And I will say, all of those Wookiee roars, do sound different to me, do sound like, Mark Thompson, who I believe did a lot of the Wookiee roars, like he really brought like a different flavor to everyone. It's fun to see all of that kind of playing out in print. But yeah, I approached it as sort of a combination of the different skills that I hopefully have. Obviously, like in the audio, no one can see the great visuals of the comic book, so you have to kind of describe things, but you also don't want to slow it down so much. You want to keep that pace going. You want to keep Aphra's monologue going. So it was a little bit different than writing maybe a novel where I feel like I can go on all these tangents, just like describing things or, creating atmosphere, things like that. It was a really interesting challenge, and I do love seeing it kind of all laid out on the page where you can sort of see like, oh, this is what was kind of going on behind the scenes, and this is what the actors saw when they were, actually recording.
It's very cool. It's very cool. It's fun. It's almost like it's written. It's not a play, but it kind of reads dramatically like that, and the layout of this is really, really exciting. Speaking of exciting, before we let you go, you have a book coming out in May, From Little Tokyo with Love. Can you give us kind of a sneak peek of that?
Sure. Yes, that is, how do I describe it? I should probably have a better handle on this since it's coming out so soon. It's a YA contemporary, so there's no like spaceships or superpowers or droids or anything like that. But it's basically about a girl who is half Japanese American, much like myself. And she has been raised in LA's beautiful little Tokyo neighborhoods, which is one of my favorite places in the world. And she feels like, like a lot of us, like she doesn't really belong anywhere. She's very grouchy. She's very anti-fairy tale, anti-happy ending, anti-princess. And then she finds out that her mother, who she thought was dead this whole time, is the most famous Asian American rom-com star in the world. So she's kind of, a perpetrator of this happy ending business, this fairy tale business. And so she kind of goes on a quest to find her. There is, of course, a cute boy involved. And I like to think of it as my own modern fairy tale about a girl who is kind of like me, who has to learn to believe in love and has to be brave enough to sort of write her own happy ending. That's what it is. And kind of, I guess, a fun connection to Aphra is the audiobook version is also being produced by Nick Martorelli, and the narrator is Emily Wu Zeller.
Yay, that's great news. Oh, yeah, man, I'm very excited
about that. As soon as it came, like Nick emailed me because, it's through like Penguin Audio, and he was like, oh yeah, I'm producing. I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited that you're producing this after the great experience we had on Aphra. And I was a little bit like, I wasn't sure if like, oh, does he already have someone in mind? Is he going to ask me to like pitch people? Like, does he already have like a big list? Like what? And he was like, well, I think, I really feel like we maybe don't have to look very far. And I was like, no, I feel that way too. Can you please ask Emily? And he did. And she happily agreed to do it. So that, I don't know if the readership for Aphra and Little Tokyo will cross over a ton. I hope it does. But there is like, I guess like a slightly exciting real life crossover that a lot of the team behind the Aphra audiobook also is doing that audiobook.
Let's take one more quick break and return with a little bit more from Sarah Kuhn. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
As we near the end of the show today, I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a cup of coffee with me and for helping to spread the word about our Star Wars family we've got here at Coffee with Kenobi. Be sure to tune in Monday nights at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook Live at www.coffeewithkenobi.com/live or www.facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi and have a cup of coffee, tea, or any beverage of your choosing with me as we continue the conversation. To join us in the CWK Cafe, which is our Facebook group, and share your Star Wars thoughts, comments, reviews, and opinions in a family-friendly, spoiler-free place that is also drama-free, go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/community and be part of the conversation, talk about this week's show, or just talk about some Star Wars. We have a lot of fun, and you'll make some new friends, as well as catch up with longtime friends along the way. I also want to thank all of the new and longtime members of the CWK Alliance and let you know how much I appreciate your help and encouragement. If you want to join the CWK Alliance, go to www.cwkalliance.com and sign up today. Not only will you help out Coffee with Kenobi, but you also get access to CWK Pour-Over, the exclusive weekly podcast not heard anywhere else. It's a great way to support and help out the show, and 10% of your monthly contributions go directly to the St. Jude Children's Hospital to support the incredibly important work they are doing to help these brave children and their families. Plus, contributors at the CWK All-Star level can watch a video podcast of CWK Pour-Over hosted by me, Tom Gross, and Corey Clubb. Feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions. In addition to being part of the community on Facebook, please don't forget to visit our website at www.coffeewithkenobi.com for Star Wars news, announcements, reviews, videos, and so much more. If you have a question for me or just want to share your thoughts on the air, feel free to email me at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com and I'll share them on the show. You can also connect with me on Twitter at Mr. Zaire, MRZEHR, or on Instagram at DanZareCWK. There are also a lot more ways to connect with me and Coffee with Kenobi on social media. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Give us a like on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi. Check us out on Pinterest or subscribe to our Coffee with Kenobi YouTube channel. On our YouTube channel, you can find Facebook Live video, different interviews throughout the years, highlights of video coverage throughout the Coffee with Kenobi history, and the audio podcast itself. You can order my book, The Star Wars Book, which I co-wrote with Lucasfilm's Pablo Hidalgo and Cole Horton, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Books A Million, Walmart, or anywhere books are sold. You can also find my writing on Coffee with Kenobi's website, as well as StarWars.com, where I am an official blogger there, and on IGN, where I contribute occasionally to articles about Star Wars, as well as other popular culture topics. If you are considering starting a podcast or a blog, let me know how I can help you get started and make your creative vision a reality. Be sure to check out danzmedia.com and we can get the process started. I am also available to come to your school, conference, business, or organization to talk about how to tap into your strengths and help you bring out your very best. I want to inspire you to be inspired so you can take that first step into a larger world. Thanks as always to our Coffee with Kenobi sponsors, especially MEI and Mouse Fan Travel, our travel partner and your one-stop shop for all things Walt Disney World, Disneyland, the Disney Cruise Lines, or anywhere on the planet you want to go on your vacation. Please go to www.coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel to book your magical vacation and help support Coffee with Kenobi in the process. If you like the show, please tweet out that you're listening, share it on Facebook, or invite your friends and family to tune in and share a cup of coffee with us. And if the Force is especially with you, please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show on iTunes or Google Podcasts. Every review makes a huge difference and helps to spread the word, and I can't thank you enough for your help, for your support, and your friendship. I love so much being a part of this wonderful Star Wars community, and I can't thank you enough for all that you do for me and Coffee with Kenobi. It's such an absolute delight to talk with you and hear behind the scenes of Star Wars Doctor Aphra. Please let people know when the book comes out, where they can get it, and where people can reach out to you online if they want to ask you a question and continue the conversation.
Oh, yes. Okay. I'm looking on my phone because, right now none of us know what day it is. It's coming out April 6th. Should be available wherever, whatever fine emporiums you like to buy books from. The signing books is it's a little different right now because of the pandemic, but if you pre-order through the Ripped Bodice here in LA, which is my home bookstore, it's a wonderful bookstore, I will be able to sign it. They have a thing set up for signed pre-orders, so if you would really, really like my beautiful signature. You can pre-order through them. Sorry, did I answer the question? I can't remember if that was everything.
Yeah, and then where can people reach out to you online if they want to say hello?
Yes. So I am on Twitter a lot. It's just my name, Sarah Kuhn, Kuhn. I'm usually on there if I'm supposed to be doing something else. I'm on Instagram at Sarah Kuhn Books because someone else already took Sarah Kuhn, which is very annoying. And then I do have a website that I probably haven't updated recently, but that is just heroincomplex.com. And that's heroin like super heroin, not like the drug.
Well, thank you again so much for being on Coffee with Kenobi.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be able to talk to other people who love Aphra. I feel like I would probably do that even if it wasn't my job.
A big thank you again to Sarah for joining us and talking about Dr. Aphra and her incredible work on this book and all that goes into fostering and growing the legacy of this character. And she really is a great addition to Star Wars. I love her in the comics and this novel and the audiobook. So be sure to check it out when you get the chance. I want to thank everybody for their support of our Facebook Live show from Walt Disney World at Galaxy's Edge. We had such a great time doing that, and it's fun to bring those surprises to you. I know Mason sure got a big thrill out of that. That was one of his favorite parts about our adventures to Walt Disney World. We will see you Monday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. Have a great week and weekend, everybody. And remember, this is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.